The morning sun filtered through the cafe's windows, casting long shadows across the empty tables. I stood behind the counter, running my fingers over the worn wood where thousands of coffee cups had left their mark over the years. In a few hours, I would have to hand over the keys to my slice of heaven, the Morning Light Cafe. "Sarah, you know this is for the best," Margaret Richardson said, adjusting her designer scarf with manicured fingers. My mother-in-law had the remarkable ability to make even sympathy sound condescending. "Running a cafe is hardly suitable for a widow in your position." My position. As if losing James 3 months ago had somehow diminished me, transformed me from a successful business owner into someone who needed their protection and guidance. The Richardsons had never approved of their son marrying a small-town baker, as they liked to call me, though they'd managed to hide their disdain better when James was alive. "The cafe is doing well," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Our revenue has actually increased since we added the new breakfast menu." "Dear," Margaret sighed, sharing a knowing look with her husband George, who stood examining our local art wall like he was appraising garage sale items. "The numbers you think are doing well are barely surviving. The property taxes alone in this area." I bit back her response. They had no idea about the property taxes because I had never shown them the real books. James and I had kept certain aspects of the cafe's operation private, knowing his parents' tendency to meddle. If they knew the truth about our financial situation, about the plans we'd made. But James was gone now, taken by a sudden heart attack at 34, and his parents had spent the last 3 months systematically dismantling everything we built together. "The papers are ready," George announced, finally turning from his inspection of local artwork. "Mr. Phillips will be here at noon to finalize the sale." Mr. Phillips, their family lawyer who had appeared with suspicious speed after James's death, armed with documents showing that the Richardsons had some claim to the cafe through a complex web of family trust agreements. I still wasn't sure how they'd managed it, but they'd made it clear that fighting them would cost more than I could afford. "I need to finish packing," I said, turning away to hide the tears threatening to spill. The storage room still held boxes of James's things, recipes we developed together, photos of our early days when the cafe was just a dream, the special roasting equipment he'd surprised me with on our last anniversary. "Don't worry about any of that," Margaret said briskly. "We'll have people handle the clearance. You should focus on finding alternative employment." The way she said it made it clear she had something specific in mind. Probably the receptionist position at George's law firm that she'd been none too subtly suggesting. A respectable job, as she put it. I waited until they left before allowing myself to break down. Sliding down behind the counter, I pulled out the worn leather notebook James and I had used to plan our future. Inside, behind the recipe notes and profit projections, was a letter from the city planning department dated just 2 weeks before James died. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Richardson," it began, "regarding your inquiry about the proposed downtown development project. James had been so excited when we first heard rumors about the city's plans. Our cafe sat at the corner of what would become the centerpiece of a massive urban renewal project. The entire block would be transformed into a modern shopping and entertainment district. We had attended city council meetings in secret, gathering information, making plans. The property values would skyrocket once the project was announced. Several developers had already made discreet inquiries, offering to buy the building for well above market value. But we had bigger plans." I pulled out another document from the notebook. Architectural plans for an expanded version of Morning Light, incorporating the neighboring vacant lot we quietly purchased through a shell company James had set up. The new cafe would have been spectacular, with rooftop seating overlooking the planned central plaza. A knock at the front door startled me from my memories. Looking up, I saw David Chen, our regular customer and local real estate attorney, peering through the glass. I quickly wiped my eyes and let him in. "I heard about the sale," he said without preamble. "Sarah, you can't let them do this." "I don't have a choice," I replied, automatic response worn smooth from repetition. "They found some clause in the family trust." "There's always a choice," David insisted, pulling out a thick folder from his briefcase. "I've been looking into the property records. The way they're trying to claim ownership through the trust is questionable at best." "If you let me help." I shook my head. "I can't afford a legal battle, David. They drained me dry before we ever got to court." He started to argue but stopped, noticing something in my expression. David had been more than just a customer over the years. He'd become a friend, someone who understood the subtle dynamics at play. "There's something you're not telling me," he said slowly. I glanced at the clock, 10:45 a.m. The sale would be finalized in just over an hour. Part of me wanted to tell David everything, to share the secret James and I had kept so carefully. But the other part, the part that had spent weeks planning this moment, knew better. "Just promise me one thing," I said, pulling an envelope from under the counter. "Deliver this to Margaret and George in exactly 2 months." David took the envelope, frowning. "Sarah, what are you?" "Promise me," I insisted. 2 months from today, no sooner." He tucked the envelope into his jacket pocket, still looking concerned. "At least let me look over the sale documents before you sign. Make sure they're not." "It's done." I cut him off. "The terms are set. Just trust me on this." After David left, I spent the remaining time walking through the cafe, touching each table, each piece of equipment. The antique espresso machine James had restored himself. The wall of customer photos we'd accumulated over 5 years of business. The hidden corner table where he proposed, getting down on one knee with a ring nestled in a coffee cup. At precisely noon, the bell above the door chimed. Mr. Phillips entered, followed by Margaret and George, all three impeccably dressed for what they clearly saw as a victory lap. "Shall we begin?" Mr. Phillips asked, spreading documents across our largest table. I sat down across from them, the leather notebook clutched in my lap like a shield. Margaret was already talking about their plans for the space. Some pretentious wine bar concept that would elevate the neighborhood. If only they knew. I signed where indicated, each stroke of the pen feeling like a betrayal and a triumph all at once. James would have understood. He would have seen the beautiful irony of it all. "Here are the keys," I said, placing them on the table. "The property's all yours." "Sarah," Margaret said, her voice dripping with insincere concern. "I know this is difficult, but you'll see we're right. This is really the best thing for everyone." I stood gathering my few remaining belongings. At the door, I turned back one last time, taking in the sight of them examining their new acquisition like vultures picking over prey. "You're right about one thing," I said softly. "This really is for the best." They didn't even look up as I left, didn't notice the small smile playing at my lips. In exactly 2 months, they would understand exactly what they'd bought and what they'd lost. But for now, I had a plan to set in motion and a promise to keep to James. The game was only beginning. 2 weeks after the sale, I sat in my small apartment reviewing the documents James and I had spent years gathering. Property assessments, zoning ordinances, environmental impact studies, all carefully organized in color-coded folders. The wall above my desk was covered in maps and city planning documents showing exactly why our little corner cafe was worth far more than the Richardsons realized. My phone buzzed. A message from David. "They've started renovations. Margaret's supervising personally." I smiled, imagining my mother-in-law micromanaging the contractors, completely unaware of what lay beneath the cafe's foundation. The geological surveys we'd commissioned had confirmed it. Our property sat at the only viable access point for the underground parking structure central to the city's development plan. Without our land, the entire project would have to be redesigned at massive expense. A knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. It was Amy, my former head barista and closest confidant. "You need to see this," she said, holding up her phone. On the screen was Margaret Richardson's latest social media post, a photo of her standing in front of Morning Light, now stripped of its signage. The caption read, "Exciting changes coming. The Richardson Wine Bar will bring sophistication to this neglected neighborhood." "Neglected?" I muttered. "We have lines around the block every morning." "There's more," Amy said, scrolling through photos. "They're gutting everything, even the original hardwood floors James restored." The mention of James sent a familiar pang through my chest. He would have hated seeing his beloved cafe dismantled, but he also would have appreciated the irony of what was coming. "Have they found it yet?" I asked. Emmy shook her head. "No sign they've discovered the basement vault. Though they did hit a snag when they tried to remove the espresso bar. Apparently it's anchored deeper than they expected." Of course it was. James had installed that bar himself, making sure it concealed the entrance to the vault where we kept our most important documents, including the original property deed with its very special clause. "Any word from City Hall?" I asked, turning back to my wall of documents. Nothing public yet, but my cousin in the planning department says the announcement is coming soon. They're just waiting for the final environmental impact reports. I nodded, checking my calendar. 6 weeks until David would deliver my envelope to the Richardsons. The timing had to be perfect. Just then, my phone rang. Margaret's number. I had ignored her calls since the sale, but something told me to answer this one. Sarah. Her voice held an unfamiliar note of tension. We need to discuss something about the property. I believe the sale was final. I replied coolly. The property is yours now. Yes, well, she paused. We've encountered some structural issues during renovations. The contractor found some kind of reinforced room beneath the main floor. The plans you provided didn't show any basement level. I smiled. You mean the plans your lawyer provided? The ones your son helped me falsify before he died. The silence on the other end was satisfying. What'd you just say? Margaret's voice had gone sharp. Nothing you need to worry about, I said sweetly. The property is yours now, structural surprises and all. Good luck with the wine bar. I hung up before she could respond, my heart racing. The game was entering its next phase. That evening, I met David at a small diner across town. The envelope I'd given him sat between us on the table as he reviewed the documents I brought. This is incredible, he said, examining the original property deed. The clause about mineral and development rights and the geographic survey results. Sarah, do you realize what this means? It means the Richardsons bought a surface property without reading the fine print. I replied, everything below ground level, including the access rights the city needs for their project, still belongs to me. David shook his head in amazement. James helped you set this up. It was his idea originally. We knew his parents would try something if anything happened to him. They never could accept that he chose a different path from their plans. I thought back to the days when James first told his parents he was leaving their law firm to open a cafe with me. The look of disgust on George's face, Margaret's tears and accusations. They had spent years trying to control him through the family trust, never realizing he was always one step ahead. The city will announce the development project next week, David said, checking his phone. Once they do, property values in the area will skyrocket. The Richardsons will think they've hit the jackpot. Until they try to sell, finished, and discover they can't without my approval. The development can't proceed without the underground access rights, and those belong to me. They'll fight it, David warned. They have resources, connections. And I have this, I said, pulling out one final document, a letter in James's handwriting, dated just days before his death. It detailed everything. His parents' attempts to control him through financial manipulation, their threats when he refused to fall in line, and most importantly, his decision to protect our future by separating the property rights. 2 more weeks, I said, glancing at the calendar. Then the envelope gets delivered. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. Through Amy's network of loyal customers, I kept tabs on the Richardsons' renovation progress. They had finally discovered the vault, but the reinforced door had stymied their attempts to open it. Margaret was apparently furious, convinced I was hiding something valuable inside. She wasn't wrong, but she was looking in the wrong direction. 1 week before the envelope's delivery date, the city made its announcement. The downtown development project was unveiled with great fanfare. A $1 billion investment that would transform our quiet neighborhood into a bustling urban center. Property values doubled overnight. Real estate agents began circling like sharks, making offers on any available space. The Richardsons' social media exploded with self-congratulatory posts about their investment vision in acquiring the cafe. I watched it all from my apartment, adding each new development to my wall of evidence. The city's plans now included detailed renderings of the underground parking structure, accessible only through our property. Engineers had confirmed there was no alternate route that wouldn't require demolishing historic buildings. Then came the call I'd been waiting for. Ms. Mitchell. The voice belonged to Daniel Morgan, chief developer for the city project. We need to discuss the property at 425 Oak Street. The Richardson Wine Bar? I asked innocently. Yes, well, that's partly why I'm calling. We've discovered some complications with the property rights. Our records show you still hold title to certain aspects of the land. I sat back in my chair, James's letter on the desk before me. I'm aware. We'd like to set up a meeting to discuss acquisition of those rights. The project timeline is rather urgent. Of course, I said. But I should warn you, I've already received several offers. He named a figure that made my heart skip. I countered with a higher one. By the end of the call, we had a tentative agreement that would make me a very wealthy woman. But it wasn't about the money. It never had been. 2 days before the envelope's scheduled delivery, Margaret showed up at my apartment unannounced. She looked different, her usual perfect composure cracked around the edges. "What are you playing at?" she demanded as soon as I opened the door. "The city's developers keep talking about complications with the property." "What did you do?" I let her in, watching as she took in my wall of documents, her eyes widening as she began to understand. "James helped me protect our investment," I said simply. "He knew you tried to take the cafe after he was gone. So we made sure you could only take what we were willing to give up." "You can't do this," she whispered. "The property is ours. We have the paperwork." "You have the surface rights," I corrected. "Everything below ground, including the access rights the city needs for their billion-dollar project, belongs to me. James made sure of that before he died." Margaret sank onto my couch, her designer outfit suddenly looking out of place in my modest apartment. "Why?" she asked, her voice small. "Why would he do this to us?" "To you?" I couldn't hold back a bitter laugh. "You spent years trying to control him, belittling his choices, using the family trust to manipulate him. He built something real, something honest, and you couldn't stand it." "We were protecting him," she protested. "The cafe, it was so beneath him." "The cafe was his dream," I cut in. "Our dream. And now it's going to pay for everything we planned together." I handed her a copy of the city's development plans, watching as she realized the full implications. The property she thought they'd snatch away from me for a bargain price was worthless without the rights I still held. "George will fight this," she said, but there was no conviction in her voice. "Good," I replied, "because in 2 days you're going to receive some very interesting documents. Things James wanted you to see after you showed your true colors." She left looking shaken, her perfect world crumbling around her. I watched from my window as she got into her luxury car, hands trembling as she gripped the steering wheel. The next day, I visited James's grave, bringing his favorite coffee blend and the news he would have loved to hear. "We did it," I whispered, touching the cool stone. "Everything we planned, everything we built. It's all working out exactly as you said it would." In less than 24 hours, David would deliver the envelope that would change everything. Inside were copies of every document proving the Richardsons' manipulation, James's letter detailing their threats, and most importantly, proof that he had outsmarted them one final time. The game was almost over, and justice was about to be served in ways they never saw coming. The morning David was scheduled to deliver the envelope, I sat in his office watching the security feed from the Richardsons' law firm on his laptop. At precisely 9 a.m., he walked into their plush reception area, envelope in hand. "They're all gathered in the conference room," he told me through our phone connection. "George, Margaret, their lawyers, even some of the senior partners." "Perfect," I replied, my heart racing. Just like James would have wanted. The feed showed David being escorted into the conference room. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I could see Margaret's face go pale as she opened the envelope. George grabbed the documents from her hands, his expression darkening with each page he read. Inside that envelope was everything. Proof that James had legally separated the surface and subsurface property rights years ago. Documentation of the Richardsons' attempts to manipulate him through the family trusts, and most devastatingly, James's final letter to his parents. "Dear Mother and Father," it began. "If you're reading this, then everything has happened exactly as I predicted. You've tried to take what Sarah and I built, thinking you could simply sweep in and claim it as your own. But I've spent years preparing for this moment, protecting our legacy from your greed." My phone buzzed. A message from Amy. "You need to see this. They're tearing up the cafe floor." Attached was a photo showing contractors breaking through the hardwood, revealing the reinforced concrete beneath. They were obviously looking for something, not realizing that the real treasure wasn't in the vault they'd discovered. Back on the security feed, I watched George stand up suddenly, his face contorted with rage. The other lawyers were passing documents around, their expressions growing more concerned by the minute. "They just found the property records," David narrated. "They're realizing that without the subsurface rights, they can't sell to any developers. The wine bar is worthless. Another message from Amy. City inspectors just showed up. They're posting notices about required permits for structural modifications. Everything was falling into place exactly as James had planned. The Richardsons had been so eager to seize control of the cafe that they hadn't bothered with proper due diligence. Now their rushed renovations were about to cost them dearly. My phone rang. Daniel Morgan from the City Development Office. "Ms. Mitchell," he said without preamble. "We've reviewed your counteroffer for the subsurface rights. The council has approved the full amount." I smiled, thinking of the number we discussed, nearly 3 times what the Richardsons had paid for the entire cafe. "When would you like to meet to finalize the paperwork?" I asked. "That's actually why I'm calling," he replied. "The Richardsons' lawyers just contacted us. They're claiming fraud, saying the property rights separation wasn't properly disclosed during the sale." "Check the sales contract," I said calmly. "Page 17, paragraph 3, subsection B. They signed off on acquiring surface rights only to the property. It's in black and white." The security feed showed George storming out of the conference room, phone pressed to his ear. Moments later, my phone rang again. His number. "You planned this," he snarled when I answered. "You and James, you set us up." "No, George," I replied evenly. "You set yourselves up. You were so convinced you could bully and manipulate your way to what you wanted that you never bothered to read what you were actually buying." "We'll fight this," he threatened. "We have resources." "So do I." I cut in. "Thanks to you, actually. The money you paid for the cafe surface rights, James and I used it to hire the best property rights attorneys in the state. Would you like their numbers?" After he hung up, I watched through the security feed as he returned to the conference room. The other lawyers were packing up their briefcases, clearly wanting no part of what was coming. Margaret sat alone at the table, still reading James's letter. Through the grainy footage, I could see tears running down her face. By afternoon, news of the development project had hit the local media. Property values in the area soared even higher as details of the planned transformation emerged. The Richardsons' wine bar concept, which had seemed pretentious before, now looked hopelessly out of place in what would become the city's premier shopping and entertainment district. I met Amy for coffee at our old rival cafe across town. She handed me her phone, showing social media lighting up with the story. "They're saying the Richardsons got conned," she said, scrolling through comments. "But anyone who knows the real story is celebrating. You should see what your old customers are saying." I smiled, remembering all the regulars who had supported us over the years, who had understood what morning light meant to the community. They would appreciate the justice of it all. A text from David interrupted our conversation. "Margaret's here. She wants to talk." 20 minutes later, I walked into David's office to find my mother-in-law sitting alone, looking smaller and older than I remembered. James' letter lay on the table between us. "Why didn't he tell us?" she asked quietly. "About the development plans, about what you were building together." "Would you have listened?" I countered. "Or would you have tried to take control of that too?" She dabbed at her eyes with an expensive handkerchief. "We thought we were protecting him. The family name, the legacy." "James built his own legacy," I said firmly. "Morning Light wasn't just a cafe. It was proof that he could succeed on his own terms, without your money or connections." "And now," she asked, "what happens now?" I pulled out the city's final offer for the subsurface rights, sliding it across the table. Her eyes widened at the number. "This is what you'll be fighting if you pursue legal action," I explained. "Every major developer in the city wants these rights. They'll wait years while you tie things up in court. But in the end, the property laws are clear. James made sure of that." "And the letter?" Her voice cracked. "The things he wrote about us, about how we treated him. That was his gift to you," I said softly. "One last chance to understand who he really was, what really mattered to him." I left her there with the letter and the contract, knowing she had decisions to make. The Richardsons could fight, spend years and fortunes in court, but they couldn't change what James had done. He had protected our dream, ensuring it would survive even without him. 2 weeks later, I stood watching as workers removed the Richardson wine bar sign from the cafe's facade. The sale of the subsurface rights had been finalized, making me wealthy enough to buy back the surface rights at twice what they had paid. Morning Light would reopen exactly as James and I had planned. The new design incorporated both the historic building and modern elements that would complement the development project. the rooftop garden we had dreamed of would happen after all. Amy supervised as our old equipment was moved back in, including James's beloved espresso machine. The contractors had never managed to open the vault, which was fine. Its contents had served their purpose. David joined me as I unlocked the front door, the familiar bell chiming above. "They're still in shock," he said, referring to the Richardsons. "George retired from the firm yesterday. Margaret hasn't been seen at the country club in weeks." I ran my hand along the counter, remembering all the mornings James and I had spent here, planning our future between serving customers. "It was never about hurting them," I said. "James just wanted them to understand that success doesn't always look the way they imagined it." The morning sun streamed through the windows, casting the same warm light that had given the cafe its name. On the wall, I hung a new photo. James on opening day 5 years ago, his smile radiant as he served our first customer. Below it, I placed a framed copy of the city's development plans showing morning light as the cornerstone of the transformed neighborhood, exactly as we had envisioned it. My phone buzzed, a message from Margaret. "He would be proud of you, of what you've built, what you protected." Maybe it was a start. Maybe understanding comes in small moments, in realizations that arrive too late but matter anyway. I began preparing for our reopening, measuring coffee beans into the grinder James had calibrated perfectly. The familiar aroma filled the air as customers began lining up outside, drawn by the grand reopening sign and the promise of something both old and new. Morning light would shine again, brighter than ever. Not just as a cafe, but as proof that sometimes the best revenge is simply staying true to your dreams, protecting what matters, and letting justice unfold in its own perfect time. James had known that all along. Now everyone else did too. "Ready to open?" Amy asked, tying on her apron. I touched the wedding ring I wore on a chain around my neck, feeling James's presence in every corner of the space we had created together. "More than ready," I replied, turning the sign to open. The morning light streamed in, and with it came the future we had planned. Different than we'd imagined, but no less beautiful for the change. Sometimes the fine print isn't about what you're giving up, but what you're protecting. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't in the battle, but in the quiet wisdom of preparing for it. And sometimes, just sometimes, justice tastes exactly like a perfect cup of coffee, served exactly where it was always meant to be.